I'm really going to change gears quite dramatically here and talk about a much more first world problem, I think, child concussion. And while it's not necessarily an extremely serious disease like some of the diseases we've seen this evening, it's certainly a very common disease, and it causes a huge amount of stress and anxiety in young people and their families. And I know you're all feeling very comfortable there, but I just think we need a little bit of audience participation here before I go on. So can I ask you to put up your hand if you've had a concussion? Whoa, that's actually quite a lot of you. And put up your hand if you've had 2 or more concussions. Okay, Andrew Steer, you're the winner. I'll be looking at you very carefully in the future. So, in recognition of the fact that concussion is getting a huge amount of attention, particularly here in Melbourne, the heart of sport in the world, I think, our research group moved from our focus on more severe injury to take up the area of concussion and really see if we could provide some facts around that. But just before I go and talk to you about those facts, I know Kathy is a real Richmond supporter, so I thought I might illustrate to you all, and I'm sure you all watch AFL football, so you'll know exactly what a concussion looks like. But let's just have a look at Jack Rewald, who happens to be one of our MCRI ambassadors for concussion, and just have a look at what happens when you have a concussion.
And the final one, a lot of you may...
Sorry, I might just stop and say this is Pat Clifton, who is the Director of Policy at the AFL, who's the voiceover here.
And the final one, a lot of you may remember this particular incident. It was from 2012 from memory, so quite an old example. Again,
and just wait for it. Again,
a good example of a
so you can see it looks very
differently
vague
to normal.
here.
Get through the slow-mo.
And now he's walking the wrong direction. And Jack's a very mild-mannered person usually, and you can see he's very agitated here.
Try not to make a joke about unusual player behaviour here. Try not to make a joke about unusual player behaviour here for Jack. Greg's in the room somewhere, I saw. I think Greg's in the room somewhere, I saw.
And so here he is coming up the race.
But even this was probably considered pretty unusual for the play.
So you can see that concussion can cause some very strange behaviours. That shift I hadn't really thought about. So one of the problems in this area is we see those kinds of injuries, but overall the community hears very, very different stories. So Trump, not a fan of these wusses who want to go off the ground after a concussion. But from the other perspective, what families are hearing is that concussion is this dreadful thing, that it can kill kids, it can lead to dementia. Worry about that, Andrew. So okay, I'll reassure you as we go on, I promise. And so we really don't know, our parents don't know how to deal with this issue with kids. So the first thing we need to think about, and the first thing we thought about as a research team, was we wanted to provide some evidence that families could rely on when they're dealing with their kids' concussion. So what is a concussion, number one? And I won't go into great detail, but basically, as you saw with Jack, it's a blow with significant force that has the impact of temporarily causing symptoms. So Jack was a bit drowsy, a bit disoriented. Kids can have headaches or be dizzy or have poor balance and so on. The key thing is that in most kids, these symptoms, and in adults, these symptoms resolve fairly spontaneously, usually within 2 weeks in adults and about 4 weeks in kids. And really importantly, part of the definition is there's no brain damage associated with that. So with all that, it seems like a pretty minor problem, so why should we care? First thing I think to think about in terms of why should we care is that concussion diagnoses are increasing over time. You can see that rise from 2010, and in our emergency department we're seeing more numbers of these all of the time. I should note they're not all AFL related. Snowboarding and skateboarding are also quite common causes of concussion based on the research from our emergency department. If we look at the statistic for kids though, they're really quite scary. So 16% of kids will have a concussion by age 10, and actually 30% will have a concussion by age 16. And I think that was well represented with the show of hands before. But luckily, most kids recover really quite well. So there's only 25% of kids, 1 in 4, who will have delayed recovery, or those symptoms that last for more than 4 weeks. So, what was the problem that we wanted to sort out? So we wanted to be able to provide good evidence to the community, to parents, about how they should manage their child's concussion. So the first thing we did, we were invited by the International Concussion in Sports group to write the first ever paediatric guidelines for the management of concussion, and so we were very pleased with ourselves. They were published in the best in the best sports medicine journal internationally, but surprisingly, no one reads them. Parents don't go off and read the British Journal of Sports Medicine. And they also, interestingly, don't read Sporting Code's websites. So we did some research, again, in the emergency department with Franz, who's my collaborator, who's up the back, I think. And what we found was 90% of parents don't know that this information exists. 40 to 60% of parents who bring their child for care after a concussion don't recall that they were given any written information about how to manage the consequences. And 42% of kids, clearly not in our emergency department, were not managed according to the recommended guidelines. And as a psychologist, I'm not surprised to be able to say that as a result of this uncertainty about what to do about these kids who've had concussion, parents report really high levels of anxiety and stress around what to do. So, what was the solution? So, our solution was to do 3 things, and we didn't necessarily have this whole plan in mind when we started. But as I mentioned, we developed the evidence. We had some standard tools, and we had our own clinical expertise. But we know that that's not really taking us very far into the community. So we partnered with Curve Tomorrow, our in-house MCRI tech team, and with them the support of our commercial team. And then, really importantly for the impact of this project, we partnered with the AFL as a key stakeholder in the field, and were funded by the Royal Children's Hospital Foundation. And so, what came from all of that? Well, what came from that was an app, Headcheck, which some of you may have seen. Not allowed to download it now while I'm talking though. And so what Headcheck does is it provides parents and coaches and young people with a map to be able to, first of all, to recognise a concussion and diagnose a concussion, and then follow through with recovery and guidance back to normal activity. So I'll just really quickly take you through this. So we'll assume that this is Alice, who's been playing basketball. She falls over and knocks her head. And so the coach has Headcheck on his or her phone, has a look, decides whether, based on the symptoms, they need to call an ambulance, they need to just suggest she goes to her GP, or they just sit her out. Then a key point of the app is that at that point in time, a message is sent via SMS to the parents if they're not there, and that's when the recovery stage starts. So we're using those guidelines that I talked to you about to recommend to families that Alice rests for 48 hours and then very quickly gets active. So starts with low-level exercise after that 48 hours and then continues to increase that exercise until she's ready to go back to school and then ready to go back to organised sport after medical clearance. So just to give you a bit of a sense of how this has been accepted by parents, here's Darren, who's had multiple opportunities to use Headcheck with his family.
My two eldest boys have actually suffered 3 concussions between them in the last 12 to 15 months, and those concussions varied in their return to activity between 2 to 3 weeks to 2 to 3 months. Certainly seeing your child be concussed in a sporting activity is quite traumatic and disturbing, but having the Headcheck app to be able to refer to in managing the recovery is really comforting. I think it's essential that parents involved in any sporting activity have Headcheck on their phones or on their device, because you don't know when you're going to need it.
So clearly Darren really liked this app quite a lot, and it was helpful, which we're really happy about. And so what Headcheck is doing in that pathway of recovery is providing us with acute management and some information on medical checks and rest periods. But we've still got that 25% of kids that have delayed recovery. And so when these symptoms persist, it's really important to ensure that families know that they should be following up to get extra intervention for their kids. But it's also important at a community level to make sure that schools and sports clubs are aware of these problems and accommodate the needs of kids. So, what are our next steps? Well, I suppose the first thing to say that isn't a next step, but something that we're very proud of, is that Headcheck has now been downloaded over 54,000 times, and I should note it's only on the Australian App Store, so that's pretty impressive. And it's also been rated 4.5 from the Raising Children's Network. So it does seem, as Darren said, that it's a useful tool. We want to promote it more in school and sports, as I just indicated. We're currently in the process of a revision where we're adding new features based on the feedback that we get. And we're almost finished an adult version for community sports, which is really exciting. So it's having an impact outside of paediatrics. So these things don't happen just with one person, and this is the members, the key members of our Take Care team that are behind this work, and this is just a small part of the Take Care team's work. So as I mentioned, Franz Babel from Emergency Medicine is my co-collaborator, Peter Harcourt from the AFL, and we have a clinical team and a research team that work really closely together to be able to provide this. And so just a final parting comment. We are really in danger, I think, of wrapping our kids in cotton wool or plastic bubble wrap or whatever this is that this boy's wrapped in. And I think we need to be able to carefully balance through the evidence how we can keep kids safe and well, but also happy and active. And on that note, I will hand over to Associate Professor Penelope Bryant, who is one of our campus clinician scientist fellows and a researcher from infection and immunity.